They put a for sale sign in my grandfather's yard before his casket was even in the ground. They handed my brother the house keys at the funeral dinner. They told everyone I'd die broke and alone. They never once asked whose name was actually on the deed. Then, at a bank on Main Street, a loan officer turned his monitor around and went quiet. But before the bank, there was the ham. "You'll never own anything worth keeping," my mother said. She smiled when she said it. She always smiled when she wanted the room to notice her. She said it at a funeral dinner, paper plates of ham and green beans. My brother was already turning our grandfather's house key over in his fingers, like a poker chip. Let me take you back to that Tuesday in April. My name is Megan Bowen. I am 31 years old. I did not raise my voice that day. I didn't need to. I reached for my water glass instead. The cheap kind, the church basement kind, stacked in plastic crates. I let the room have its moment. Travis kept flipping that key. My father, Dale, didn't laugh at my mother's line. He didn't stop her either. In the Bowen family, silence always meant agreement. My mother, Diane, kept that warm little smile pointed straight at me. Strangers read it as kindness. I'd had 31 years to learn what it actually was. "She's not wrong," Travis said, grinning around a mouthful of green beans. "No offense, Meg. You're just not built for owning things." I didn't answer him. I looked past him instead, out the church hall window, toward Sycamore Road. My grandfather Earl's farmhouse sat 4 miles off. The porch light was still burning. Nobody had thought to turn it off. I thought about the deed, not the key Travis was so proud of. A key opens a door. It doesn't say whose name sits on a page down at the Coshocton County Recorder's office. 2 blocks from where we were sitting. I read names off pages like that for a living. I'm a title examiner. I work at a firm in Columbus, 90 minutes west. I trace who legally owns what. Decades of sales, mortgages, quiet family deals nobody wrote down right. 6 weeks earlier, I caught a clouded title on a duplex. An unreleased lien from 1987 for $812, still sitting open on the county record. It would have cost a young couple their entire $214,000 closing. I balance columns to the penny. I do not guess. My manager calls me the most boring person in the building. She means it as the highest compliment she has. My family had a different story about me. In the Bowen version, I was the one who couldn't manage money, the one who'd die broke. My mother said it the way other families say grace. Easy, automatic, like it wasn't a sentence about a person at all. I never argued. Arguing gives a lie oxygen. Here's what I did instead. Quietly, for 9 years, I kept a fireproof box in the back of my closet. Gray metal, dented on one corner. My grandfather's initials scratched into the lid, EJB. He'd handed it to me himself years back and said one sentence I didn't understand at the time. "Keep this closed, Megan, until a man behind a desk asks you a question you can't answer any other way." I never opened it. I didn't even know what was inside. I only knew it sat behind my winter boots, waiting. The way certain things wait, long after you've stopped expecting them to matter. That afternoon, at the funeral dinner, my mother wasn't finished. "We're going to fix the place up," she announced to the table. Her hand rested on Travis's shoulder like he'd already accomplished something. New roof. Maybe sell it by fall. Lord knows somebody in this family needs the money to work with. Somebody who wasn't me. That part didn't need saying out loud. It never did. My grandfather, Earl Bowen, had died 4 days earlier, 82 years old. Quietly, in his sleep, in the same farmhouse where he'd built the porch himself, back in 1974. He was the only person in my family who ever told me the truth about anything. I'd buried him that morning, in a cemetery outside Coshocton. The dirt was still damp from rain the night before. He used to say the house remembers who carried it. I hadn't understood that sentence either. Not then. Here's what I did understand. My parents had stopped paying my grandfather years ago for a house he'd sold them on a handshake and a land contract, back when my father still had steady work at the mill. I didn't know the numbers yet. I only knew that whenever the farmhouse came up at holidays, my father got quiet in a specific way. The way a man gets quiet when he's doing math, he doesn't want anyone watching. I finished my water. I set the glass down without a sound. I should get back to Columbus before dark, I said. Nobody argued. Nobody ever minded when I left early. It made more room at the table for people they liked better. I drove home that night past the farmhouse. I slowed at the end of Sycamore Road, the way I always did, watching the porch light burn against the dark. I didn't stop. I just looked. The way you look at something you already suspect is more yours than anyone knows. 2 weeks later, my father called. He almost never called. "Your mother and I are meeting with the bank," he said. His voice did that careful, over-casual thing. The thing it did when he wanted something without asking directly. Just a formality on some paperwork. "Might need you there, Meg, since you know all that legal stuff." I said I'd come. I always came when they needed something legal-shaped explained. It was, apparently, the one use I had. I hung up. I looked at the calendar on my kitchen wall, then at the closet door. Behind it sat a gray metal box I still hadn't opened, waiting on a question nobody in my family had thought to ask yet. I didn't know the question was 6 weeks from landing. I didn't know it would come from a stranger behind a bank counter, in front of everyone who'd ever told me I'd die broke. I only knew, the way you know weather is turning, that something in that farmhouse's paperwork never matched the story my family told about it. So the next morning, before work, with 40 minutes to spare, I did what I do for strangers all day for a living. I pulled the chain of title on my own grandfather's house. I didn't expect to find anything. That's the truth. I wasn't hunting for a weapon. I was checking a fact, the way I check every fact. Out of a discipline nobody in my family had ever bothered to notice or thank me for. The Coshocton County Recorder's Office keeps its old land records on microfilm. A back room that smells like dust and toner. I sat at the reader with a legal pad, tracing the chain backward. 3 owners. A 1974 purchase, a 1998 refinance. Then, in 2015, an assignment I didn't recognize. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time, out loud, to an empty room, just to hear if the words sounded any different spoken than they did on a screen. They didn't. They said exactly what they'd said the first time. I closed the reader. I gathered my legal pad. I walked out into a parking lot going gray with early spring rain, holding a fact my whole family was about to walk straight into. Without knowing it existed, I didn't call anyone. I didn't tell anyone. I drove back to Columbus with both hands steady on the wheel. That night, for the first time in 9 years, I took the gray metal box down from behind my winter boots. I set it on my kitchen table. I still didn't open it. Not yet. I sat with it a while. The way you sit with a letter you already suspect will change something, working up the nerve to finally do what my grandfather had asked of me 9 years earlier, on a porch in April, with the light already starting to fail. That was the spring I turned 22, fresh out of community college, a certificate in title work, and no real job yet. Grandpa Earl had walked me out to that same porch, coffee in one hand, the gray box in the other. He set it down on the rail between us, like it weighed more than metal usually does. "Your parents think this house is theirs," he said. He looked out at the fields, not at me. "It isn't. Hasn't been. Not the way they think. Not for a long while now. I asked him what he meant. He only shook his head. That small, private smile. The one he got when he'd already decided not to explain something. Keep the box, he said. Don't open it unless you have to. You'll know when you have to. I laughed it off at the time. You laugh off anything that sounds like a movie, not your actual family. I was 22, student loans, a used Corolla with a bad alternator. I did not think I was the kind of person things got left to. I thought about that porch conversation the whole drive home from the recorder's office, replaying his voice, trying to remember if there'd been anything else, any other sentence I'd let slide past me, back when I didn't know yet which sentences to keep. At work the next morning, I ran 2 more searches before lunch, both routine. A duplex on the east side, a small ranch near the fairgrounds. I like the rhythm of it. Grantor, grantee, consideration, recorded and indexed. People transferring what they owned to people who would eventually transfer it again. A chain of title doesn't lie to you, not on purpose. It just sits there, dated and signed, waiting for someone patient enough to read it in order. My coworker Priya leaned over my cubicle wall around 10. You look like you found something, she said. You get a face. Just family stuff, I said. Nothing that pays the mortgage. She laughed and went back to her file. I didn't correct her. I didn't have the words yet for what I'd actually found, just the shape of it, sitting behind my sternum like a held breath. That night, I finally opened the gray box. Not all the way. I lifted the lid maybe 2 inches. I saw the edge of a manila folder, the corner of a formal document, a county seal visible in the fold. Then I closed it again. I don't know why I stopped. Maybe because once I saw the rest, there'd be no version of my family left that matched the one I grew up believing. Some stubborn, tired part of me wanted one more night of not knowing for certain. I made tea instead. I sat at my kitchen table, the box shut in front of me, and a porch light 4 counties away kept burning in my mind. The way it had burned every night since I was a kid. Whether or not anyone in that family had ever once turned around to notice who kept it lit. I opened the box 3 nights later, a Thursday. I'd spent that afternoon at work closing out the duplex file, the one with the clouded title from 1987. I watched the young couple sign their final papers, never knowing how close they'd come to losing the whole deal over a single unreleased lien. They thanked me twice on their way out. I told them it was nothing, just doing my job carefully, and I meant it. Driving home that evening, though, I found myself thinking about something else. How rarely anyone gets thanked for the disasters they quietly prevent, instead of the ones they clean up after. I remember the date because that was the same night my mother texted me a photo of paint swatches, sage green, butter yellow, for a farmhouse kitchen, a house that wasn't sold yet, being redecorated in a group chat, like Grandpa Earl had only stepped out for groceries. I set my phone face down. I lifted the lid all the way this time. Inside sat a manila folder, soft at the corners from age. Under it, a small leather notebook, the cover cracked, and a sealed envelope with my name on it, in Grandpa Earl's handwriting. Megan, nothing else. I opened the folder first. It felt safer somehow. Paper before words. The top page was a warranty deed, dated March of 2015. I recognized the format before I even read the names. I read deeds like this 5 days a week. This one named a trust as grantee, the Earl J. Bowen Family Protection Trust. Below that, a certificate of trust, listing the sole beneficiary, Megan Ann Bowen. I read it twice, the way I had at the recorder's office. I read it a third time, out loud, just to be sure my own voice hadn't started lying to me too. It hadn't. The house on Sycamore Road belonged to a trust. I was the only name inside it. I set the folder down. My hands weren't shaking, which surprised me. I think I'd been braced for this a long time. The way you brace for weather you can already smell. I opened the notebook next. Grandpa Earl's handwriting again. Smaller, older, dates back to 2012. Numbers in one column, notes in another. I didn't understand all of it that first night. I understood enough. Payments received. Then, starting in 2013, a gap. Then a new heading, assumed note, First Merchants Bank, balance $61,400. Then payments again. But the name paying wasn't my parents'. It was his. He'd been quietly covering his own son-in-law's mortgage for 2 years before he ever moved the deed into a trust at all. Then I opened the envelope. Inside was one page, folded twice, dated the same month as the deed. Megan, it began. If you're reading this, a banker finally asked the question I always knew somebody would. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you sooner. Your father borrowed against this house in 2013 to cover a debt of your brother's. He let the payments lapse within the year. I paid off the balance myself so the bank wouldn't take it. I could have handed the house back to your parents free and clear. I didn't. I moved it into a trust with your name on it instead. You were the only one of my 3 grandchildren who ever once asked if I needed help carrying something. Keep the box closed until you need it. You'll know when that is. Count carefully. Love, Grandpa. Count carefully. That was the second time I'd heard that phrase from him. I didn't remember the first time yet. Not that night. I sat at my kitchen table until almost 1 in the morning, the letter flat under my palm, rereading 4 words until they stopped sounding like words. You were the only one. I thought about every dinner where my mother said I'd die broke, every holiday my father let it pass without a word, every year Travis called me not built for owning things, standing in a house he never once actually owned. I didn't cry. No dam breaking, nothing like that. It was quieter. It felt like something crooked, finally sitting level. I called Priya the next morning before work, not to explain everything, just enough. Turns out I might own my grandfather's house, I said. There was a pause. Might? There's a trust. I'm the beneficiary. I need somebody who actually practices this, instead of just reading records for a living. She gave me a name, an estate attorney her firm used for closings, Carol Ostrander, 2 blocks from the courthouse. I called that afternoon. I got an appointment for Monday. It felt like both an eternity and no time at all. Life kept moving anyway, indifferent to what I was carrying. My mother texted twice more about paint swatches. My father called once to ask if I'd found the deed to Grandpa's truck. He wanted it transferred to Travis before probate. I haven't looked, I told him. It was the first time I'd ever lied to my father about paperwork. It came out easier than I expected. At work, I finished the duplex closing. I started a new file. A farmhouse 2 counties over, uncomfortably close to my grandfather's. I caught myself reading its chain of title slower than usual, checking twice for anything hidden. I knew now how things could hide. Sunday, my mother called to remind me about the bank. Thursday, 10 in the morning. First Ozark, she said, then corrected herself. No, Tri-County Savings, on Main Street. She'd misspoken the bank's name and corrected it fast. I almost missed it. I didn't. It's just a formality, she said. The same phrase my father had used 2 weeks earlier, word for word. I wondered if they'd rehearsed it. What kind of formality? Refinancing something. Getting your brother's name added properly now that Dad's gone. You know how banks are. They need everybody's signature who might have an interest. Might have an interest. She had no idea how true that was, or how differently it applied to me. "I'll be there," I said. I hung up. I looked at the calendar again. 4 days. I thought about calling them right then, laying the trust document out over the phone, ending the confusion before it built any further. I didn't. Grandpa Earl had been specific. Not until a banker asked, not my mother, not Travis. A stranger, behind a desk, with no reason to lie for anyone. I decided to trust his instructions the way I trust a properly recorded deed. Completely. Without needing every reason yet. Monday, I met Carol Ostrander. She read the trust certificate, the deed, the notebook, the letter, in near silence, flipping pages the same unhurried way I flip other people's files. "This is airtight," she said finally. "Your grandfather did this exactly right. Recorded, witnessed, notarized. Nobody can undo it. Not your parents, not a court, nobody who didn't know it existed." "They're going to a bank Thursday," I said, "to add my brother to the deed." She looked up. "They can't do that. Not legally. Whatever they think they're signing, it isn't going to do what they think. Should I tell them before Thursday?" Carol set the folder down. She looked at me a long moment. "That's not a legal question," she said. "That's a family one. I can only tell you what the paper says. The paper says the house is yours. What you do Thursday morning is up to you." I thanked her. I gathered my folder. I drove home with the trust certificate on the passenger seat, like something alive. I didn't decide anything that night. I let it sit, the way Grandpa Earl had taught me to let a hard fact sit until it stops needing your help to be true. Wednesday night, I packed the box into a canvas tote. I set it by my front door, ready for morning. I didn't call ahead. I didn't warn anyone. I only checked twice that the letter was tucked back inside its envelope, folded the exact way Grandpa Earl had folded it. Some things, I'd decided, deserved care, even on their way to finally being used. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept thinking about the notebook, the years of numbers, my grandfather's small handwriting, carrying a debt nobody else in the family even knew existed. I thought about how long a person can hold a weight like that quietly, without ever once asking for credit. I thought about my father, too. Not with anger exactly. Something closer to a cold, careful curiosity, the kind I bring to a bad file at work. What had he told himself all those years? Walking past a house he no longer legally owned, still calling it his in front of his own children. Had he known the trust existed, or had my grandfather kept that from him completely? I didn't know yet. I'd find out soon enough, in a conference room on Main Street, in front of people who thought they already understood how this story ended. Tri-County Savings sat on the corner of Main and 3rd. Brick front, green awning. The same bank my grandfather had used his whole life. I'd been inside it exactly twice before. A school field trip in 3rd grade. A graduation check he'd given me. $500 20 years later, at that same counter. I parked across the street at 9:50. I sat in my car a minute, the canvas tote on the passenger seat, the gray box inside it. I thought about turning around. Some part of me still wanted one more quiet morning, still just the daughter who couldn't manage money, not the one holding a fact about to rearrange everyone's understanding of everyone else. I got out of the car. Inside, my parents were already seated, a small round table near the loan officer's desk. Travis sat beside them, one ankle crossed over his knee, scrolling his phone. My mother waved when she saw me, that same warm smile. "There she is," she said, "right on time. Some things never change." I didn't answer that. I sat down in the empty chair, tote bag at my feet. The loan officer introduced himself as Arthur Kessler, an older man, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, the kind of quiet competence I recognize, because I try to have it myself. He'd been at that branch 26 years, he mentioned, pulling up his system. He remembered my grandfather, said so plainly, without being asked. Earl was a good man, he said. Came in every first Monday like clockwork. Never missed one, all the years I knew him. My mother's smile flickered, just slightly, at the word clockwork. I noticed. I don't think anyone else did. We're here about a home equity line, my father said. He steered the conversation the way he always steered conversations, fast. Past anything that might slow things down. Adding my son to the account, simplifying things now that Dad's passed. Arthur nodded, typing. Let me pull up the property first, get the title current before we go further. It's the Sycamore Roadhouse, my mother said. Should be simple enough. Should be, Arthur agreed. Still typing. I watched his face while he worked. 26 years of reading files teaches you something. You learn to spot the exact moment a face changes, because you've made that face yourself more than once over paperwork. His changed. He scrolled. He clicked something. He scrolled back up. He took his glasses off his forehead and put them on properly, the way you do when you need to be sure, the second time. That's odd, he said. Mostly to himself. What's odd? My father asked. Arthur didn't answer right away. He clicked again. He leaned in toward his screen, the exact way I lean into mine when a chain of title stops matching what a client told me on the phone. Give me one moment, he said. My mother laughed, a small nervous sound. It's a formality, Arthur. We've been banking here 30 years. I know you have, Diane. He didn't look up. That's exactly why this doesn't make sense. Travis finally put his phone down. I sat very still. I didn't reach for the tote bag yet. Grandpa Earl had been specific. Wait for the question. Don't hand him the answer before he's asked for it. Arthur angled his monitor slightly, not all the way around yet. He read something silently, lips barely moving, the way people read when they want to be certain, before they say a sentence out loud that can't be unsaid. Then he looked up. Not at my father, not at my mother, at me. Miss Bowen, he said. You're Megan? I am. Can you help me understand something? He turned the monitor all the way around. A parcel record, a vesting line, highlighted in the middle of the page. The deed of record on this property has listed the Earl J. Bowen Family Protection Trust as owner since March of 2015. It lists you, Megan Ann Bowen, as the trust's sole beneficiary. The room went quiet. I won't try to describe that quiet to anyone who wasn't in it. Why does your daughter own this house? Arthur asked. He was looking at my parents now. Based on what's in front of me, neither of you has held title to this property in almost 10 years. My father's face did something I'd never seen it do. Not anger. Not yet. Something closer to a man watching a number finally match a fear he'd carried alone for a decade. That can't be right, my mother said. Her smile was gone. There's some mistake, some clerical error. Earl would never. Grandpa would, I said quietly. He did. I reached down. I unzipped the tote bag. I set the gray metal box on the table between us, dented corner facing up, his initials catching the fluorescent light. Nobody said anything for a moment. Travis stared at the box like it might be dangerous. What is that? My father said. It wasn't really a question. His voice had gone flat, the way it always went right before he stopped arguing and started calculating. It's what Grandpa left me, I said. The deed, the trust, a letter. He told me not to open it until somebody behind a desk asked me a question I couldn't answer any other way. I looked at Arthur. I think that just happened. Arthur, to his credit, didn't smile, didn't gloat. He reached for a legal pad. He started taking careful notes, the way a good record keeper does when history suddenly needs catching up on paper. "I'll need copies of everything in that box," he said. "And before we go any further, I think we need to talk about why there's a home equity application in front of me for a property none of you currently own." My mother turned to me first this time, not my father. Her voice had lost its warmth completely. "You knew," she said. "This whole time. You knew. And you let us plan a renovation. You let Travis. I found the trust documents 9 days ago," I said. "I didn't know before that. Grandpa asked me to wait for exactly this moment." I did what he asked. "Why would he do this to us?" my father said. For the first time in my life, I heard something close to real fear underneath his anger. Not about losing a house, something else, something I didn't understand yet, sitting just beneath his voice. Arthur cleared his throat. "Mr. Bowen, before we go further on the trust, I need to ask about the existing lien on this property, the reverse mortgage taken out in 2013. Your current balance shows." "That's not relevant," my father said. Too quickly, Arthur looked at his screen again, then back at my father. Something in his face told me this conversation was about to get much bigger than any of us had walked in expecting. "Mr. Bowen," he said carefully, "I think it's very relevant. The last appraisal put this property at $58,000 against a balance of $71,300. It's been worth less than what's owed against it for almost 3 years, which means whoever holds title has been the only thing standing between this house and a bank sale." He looked at me again. "That would be you, Miss Bowen. It has been you, since before your grandfather passed." I let that sit a moment before I answered. I thought about the leather notebook, still at home in that folder, the payments my grandfather made in silence for years, so a bank never had to send this exact letter to anyone. "He never told me the numbers," I said. "Only the letter. I think he wanted the paperwork to speak for itself when it finally had to." Arthur nodded slowly, like a man closing a file he already knew the ending of. "It usually does," he said. "Eventually. It just takes somebody patient enough to let it." Arthur asked for a private room. He called it a compliance step. I think he mostly wanted to get us away from the lobby, where 2 other customers had started pretending very hard not to listen. We moved to a small conference room off the main floor. Fake wood table, a landline nobody used anymore, a calendar from a local propane company still turned to February. My father sat across from me, my mother beside him. Travis, for once, said nothing at all. Arthur laid out the numbers slowly, the way you'd walk someone through a diagnosis. In 2013, my father had taken a reverse mortgage against the Sycamore Roadhouse, $61,400, drawn out over 8 months, to cover a debt Travis had brought home, a failed car lot run with 2 friends from high school. "It wasn't failed," Travis said. "It was undercapitalized. Nobody responded to that, not even our mother." By 2015, my father had stopped making the required payments on the reverse mortgage's tax and insurance obligations. That's when the bank moved to call the loan. That's also when Grandpa Earl, according to Arthur's decade-old file notes, personally paid off the balance in full. $61,400, Arthur read aloud, paid in 3 installments between April and June of 2015. Then the deed was transferred to a trust the following month. "He never told me that," my mother said. Her voice had gone thin. "He never once told me he paid off Dale's loan." "He wasn't paying off Dale's loan," I said. "He was paying off yours too. It was your house. You signed for it same as he did." My mother looked at me like I'd struck her. I hadn't meant it as cruelty. I'd meant it as the plain shape of the file in front of us, the same way I'd explain any deed to any stranger across a desk. Why would he do this without telling anyone? My father said again, quieter this time, almost to himself. I thought about the letter, folded twice in my tote bag. I thought about Count carefully, and the porch, and a version of my grandfather none of us had apparently ever fully known. I think he was tired of being the only one carrying it, I said. I think he wanted somebody else to know how, in case he wasn't here to keep carrying it forever. Arthur cleared his throat gently. There's also the matter of today's application, the home equity request. Since neither of you holds title, I can't process it. I'm required to flag the file for review, given the discrepancy. What kind of review? My father asked. Standard title discrepancy review. It goes to our loan compliance officer. Given the trust structure and the history here, it may also get referred to our fraud department, purely as a formality. The application listed you both as sole owners, without disclosing the trust. My father's face went pale. I hadn't seen it do that before. Not embarrassed pale. Something closer to a man doing arithmetic he'd been avoiding for a decade, and finally reaching the bottom of the page. I didn't know about the trust, he said. I swear to God, Meg, I didn't know. I believed him, actually. Whatever else my father was, he wasn't a good enough liar to fake the particular flavor of dread that had settled into his voice. Then who signed the application today? I asked. If you didn't know, you didn't own it? He didn't answer. My mother answered instead, quietly, staring at the table. We thought Earl put it back in our name before he died, she said. He told us, years ago, that everything was handled. We thought that meant it came back to us. It didn't, I said. It meant he'd handled it. Just not the way you assumed. Arthur gathered his notes. He was careful not to look at any of us too directly. The tact of a man who'd sat through worse family conversations at that same table. I'll need to keep copies of the deed, the trust certificate, and the letter, he said, glancing at me. For the file. You'll get the originals back. I nodded and slid the folder across. I kept the leather notebook and the envelope for myself. Some things, I decided, weren't the bank's to hold, even temporarily. We left separately. My parents didn't wait for me in the lobby. I found them in the parking lot instead, standing by my father's truck, not talking to each other. The silence of two people who'd just learned their story wasn't entirely true. I need time, my mother said when she saw me crossing the lot. Not angry exactly. Something flatter than anger. I need time to understand what just happened in there. That's fair, I said. Are you going to sell it? Travis asked, arms crossed, sunglasses on despite the overcast sky. The house. Are you going to sell it out from under us? I haven't decided anything, I said. I found out I owned it 9 days ago, Travis. Give me more than 9 days to figure out what happens next. He didn't have anything to say to that. He got in his car and left without another word, tires chirping slightly on the wet pavement. The closest thing to a tantrum I'd ever seen him throw. My father lingered a moment longer. Your grandfather, he started, then stopped. Started again. He was harder on me than he ever let on to you kids. I want you to know that. Whatever he thought of me by the end, I don't think it was nothing. I don't think it was nothing either, I said. I think it was exactly what the notebook says. He paid your debt without telling you, and he made sure it could never happen to this family again the same way. That's not nothing. That's just not the same thing as trust. He nodded slowly, the way a man nods when he understands a sentence completely and has no argument left against it. I drove home that afternoon with the leather notebook on the passenger seat. The trust folder now sat in a bank's compliance file instead. I called Carol Ostrander from a red light on Route 16 to update her. She told me calmly that everything happening was exactly what a properly executed trust was designed to do. The paperwork protects people, she said, even from themselves. Sometimes, especially from themselves. That night, I finally read the leather notebook cover to cover. Every entry, every date. Somewhere around 2014, a new name started appearing beside my grandfather's payment records. Not my father's, not Travis's. A woman named Patricia Renner, listed as co-signer on a small personal loan Grandpa Earl had also guaranteed, dated 8 months before the reverse mortgage payoff. I didn't know who Patricia Renner was. Not yet, but her name sat there in his handwriting. 3 separate times. In a ledger I'd been told, for years, held nothing anyone needed to worry about. I decided, sitting at my kitchen table with the notebook open under the lamp, that I wasn't finished reading my grandfather's paperwork. Not by a long way. I want to back up for a moment. I skipped something important. The week between the bank meeting and my first call to Patricia Renner, I almost didn't go looking any further at all. It would be easy to tell this story like I marched from one discovery straight to the next, certain the whole time. I wasn't. I spent 4 days after Arthur turned that monitor around just going to work, coming home, not opening the notebook again. Priya noticed. She always notices. "You've had that look for a week," she said, dropping a stack of files on my desk Thursday morning, the one you get right before you tell a client their closing's falling apart. "My grandfather left me a house," I said. "Turns out my parents didn't actually own it. Turns out there's more to the paperwork than I've looked at." She sat on the edge of my desk. She never does that. Priya believes in ergonomic chairs the way some people believe in scripture. "Are you going to look at the rest of it?" she asked. "I don't know yet." "Megan." She said my name the way you say a name when you're about to remind someone of something they already know. "You caught an unreleased lien from 1987 on a file nobody was even paying you extra to double-check. You don't have an off switch for this. You never have." She was right. I knew she was right. I still sat on it 2 more days before I finally opened the notebook fully. That week, coincidentally, I got assigned a file that mirrored my own situation. An elderly client in Dublin, Ohio. Her son had quietly taken a home equity loan against her house, using a power of attorney she barely remembered signing. She hadn't known. Not until a title search for an unrelated refinance turned it up, the same way mine had turned up, at the recorder's office, on a Tuesday morning I hadn't expected anything from either. I worked that file with more attention than usual. The power of attorney was dated correctly, witnessed properly. Nothing fraudulent about how it was signed. Just a son using a legitimate tool for a use his mother never actually intended, counting on her never checking the county records closely enough to notice. She noticed, because somebody finally showed her how. I walked her through it myself, over the phone, more gently than the job description probably required. I understood something in her voice that I hadn't fully understood about my own situation until I heard it from someone else's mouth. "I trusted him," she said. "I still love him. I just don't know what to do with both those things right now." "You don't have to choose between them today," I told her. "You just have to know what the paper actually says. The rest, you can figure out slowly." I thought about that call the whole drive home. I thought about my father. Whether the reverse mortgage started out of desperation for Travis or something closer to fear. Fear of what admitting the truth would cost him. With my mother, with Grandpa Earl, with anyone at all. I didn't excuse it, not one bit of it. But I understood it a little better, filing that stranger's paperwork away that Thursday, than I had the day Arthur turned his monitor around. That weekend, I finally called Danielle, my cousin, Aunt Carol's daughter. We hadn't spoken properly in almost 2 years, not since a wedding where we'd ended up at the same table by accident and talked 3 hours about nothing important at all. I heard something happened at the bank, she said, before I'd even gotten past hello. Mom's been on the phone about it for a week straight. What's she saying? I asked. That Uncle Dale's finally getting what's coming to him. That Aunt Diane always played favorites, and now the universe is settling accounts. Honestly, half of it sounds made up. I told her the real version, all of it, in order. The way I'd tell a client the actual chain of title, instead of the rumor a neighbor passed along about who really owned what. She was quiet a long moment when I finished. Grandpa Earl gave me $50 every birthday until I turned 18, she finally said. I always thought that was just what grandfathers did. I never thought about what it must have cost him. Bailing out an entire branch of the family, quietly, at the same time. I don't think he saw it as a cost, I said. I think he saw it as the only math that actually mattered to him. That's a very you thing to say, she said. There was warmth in it, not mockery. The teasing you only get from someone who's known you since before you had a reason to perform anything for each other. We talked another hour after that, mostly about nothing. The way family conversations go, when nobody's hiding a debt or a deed underneath them. It was the first easy conversation I'd had with anyone in my family in longer than I wanted to admit. I called Carol Ostrander back that Monday, finally ready to move forward, instead of sitting with the notebook unopened on my counter. I want to keep going, I told her. I want to understand everything he built, not just enough to win the bank meeting. That's the right instinct, she said. Most people stop the moment they've won. The ones who actually understand what they've inherited keep reading. I think that was the moment I stopped thinking of this as something that had happened to me. I started thinking of myself as someone finishing a job my grandfather had started and simply run out of time to complete on his own. I want to tell you about the day I actually opened the notebook fully. I skipped past the details the first time. They matter more than I gave them credit for. It was a Sunday. I'd cleared my whole afternoon for it. The way you clear an afternoon for a task you suspect will take longer than you're prepared for. I made a pot of coffee I barely touched. I laid the notebook flat on my table, next to a legal pad of my own. I started at the very first page, instead of skimming toward the parts that had already surprised me. Grandpa Earl's handwriting in 2012 was tighter than it became by 2019. The letters closer together, like a man still getting used to the idea that he'd need careful records of something he'd assumed would stay simple. The early entries were mundane: feed store receipts before he sold the business, a payment to a roofer, a note about replacing the water heater at the farmhouse, an arrow drawn to a second note. D still hasn't mentioned reimbursing me. Won't ask. D for Dale, my father. I found more of those small, quiet subsidies through 2012 and 2013. None large individually. $100 here, $300 there. Always the same short phrase after. Won't ask. It became a kind of refrain through the notebook's early pages. The sound of a man deciding, again and again, not to make anyone feel the weight he was carrying for them. Then came the entry that changed the notebook's whole character. March 2013. Dale took out equity loan against the house for Travis's dealership. Didn't tell Diane the real number. I know because the bank called me by mistake, asking about a reference on the application. I sat with that sentence a long time. My father had listed Grandpa Earl as a reference on the loan application, apparently without thinking it through. The bank's routine verification call had accidentally handed my grandfather the exact secret my father would spend the next decade trying to protect. The next several pages tracked the loan's decline. Careful, dispassionate detail. Missed payment, June 2014. Late notice sent, certified mail, July 2014. Called Dale, he says he's handling it. He is not handling it. I laughed out loud at that last line, alone in my kitchen. The first genuinely light moment I'd had reading the whole account. It sounded exactly like something I might write myself in a margin about a client insisting a lapsed policy was under control. By early 2015, the entries turned urgent, though Grandpa Earl's handwriting never did. Level and neat, even as the situation clearly wasn't. Bank sent formal notice, 90 days to cure or face acceleration. Spoke to Carl about options, then, dated exactly 1 week later, decided. Paying it off myself, not telling Dale the source of the funds. He needs to believe the crisis passed on its own, or he will do this again the moment he believes I am not watching. That sentence told me who my grandfather actually was, more than any other line in the notebook. Not a man hoarding secrets for the pleasure of power. A man who'd studied his own son-in-law carefully enough to know exactly what kind of lie would protect the family, and which kind would only delay the same disaster a few years. I found the trust paperwork a few pages later, a note that read simply, "Deed to trust filed today. M gets the box when I'm gone, or sooner if it's ever truly needed. She'll know what to do with it. She always reads things twice. She always reads things twice." I sat with that line longest of anyone in the notebook. I thought about every time in my childhood he'd handed me something to look at twice before letting me put it down. A receipt at the feed store counter, a recipe card in my grandmother's handwriting years after she'd passed, a church bulletin once, just to see if I'd noticed the typo in the pastor's name before anyone else at the table did. I had noticed. I always noticed. I think, somewhere in those small tests, he'd been quietly building a case file on me for years, deciding, one careless afternoon at a time, whether I was the kind of person paperwork could safely be entrusted to. I finished the notebook around 6 that evening, the coffee gone cold beside me, the last pages mostly routine again, small payments, small notes. The account of a man who'd solved his family's largest hidden crisis, then simply kept living quietly beside people who never knew he'd done it. The very last entry, dated 4 months before he died, read, "Everything holds. Told M nothing new. She'll find it when she needs it, and not one day before." I closed the notebook. I sat in my kitchen a long while, the light outside fading, the same slow way it fades over the farmhouse on Sycamore Road, 4 counties east, where a porch light was, at that exact moment, still burning on a timer I hadn't installed yet. In a house I didn't fully understand yet, was already completely mine. I called Carol first thing Monday morning. I finished the notebook. I told her, "I understand what I'm holding now. All of it." "How do you feel?" she asked. Not a question she usually asked, being a woman more interested in documents than feelings most days. "Like I finally understand the assignment," I said. "Not the house. The other one. The one he was actually running this whole time." "Which was?" she asked. "Making sure somebody in this family would always check," I said, "even after he couldn't anymore." Carol was quiet a moment on the other end. "I think you're exactly right," she finally said. "I also think, for what it's worth, he chose correctly. You have probably already guessed there was more to Patricia Renner than a name in a ledger. You have not guessed all of it. Not yet. I found her the plain way, the way I find anyone in a record search, a property lookup, cross-referenced against the loan number in Grandpa Earl's notebook. Patricia Renner owned a small brick duplex on the east side of Coshocton. half a mile from the feed store my grandfather used to run. I sat with that fact 2 days before I called her. I told myself it was thoroughness, the same instinct that makes me check an old lien instead of assuming it doesn't matter. I don't think that was the whole truth. I think some part of me needed to know if my grandfather had secrets bigger than a trust. Patricia answered on the third ring. Her voice was careful, the voice of someone used to being asked about money she'd rather not discuss. "I'm Earl Bowen's granddaughter," I said. "Megan, I found your name in some old paperwork of his. I'm not calling about the loan. I just wanted to understand what it was for." There was a long pause, long enough I thought she'd hung up. "He asked me not to tell your family," she finally said. "But he's gone now. I suppose that promise doesn't hold the same shape anymore." Patricia had worked at the feed store 11 years, back when Grandpa Earl still owned it. When her husband left in 2013, she'd been 6 weeks from losing the duplex. A predatory refinance, a balloon payment of $9,400 nobody had explained to her properly. "Earl found out from somebody at church," she said. "He didn't ask me anything. He just showed up one Tuesday with a personal loan for $9,400 already drafted. 2% interest, lower than the bank would ever give me. Told me to sign it, or he'd feel like he'd failed somebody who'd worked hard for him for over a decade." "Did you pay it back?" I asked. I already half knew the answer would matter more than the numbers. "Every dollar," she said. Something like pride cut through the careful tone. "Early, actually. He wouldn't take extra interest either. Said the whole point was never to profit off it." I thought about my father's reverse mortgage, the exact same year, the exact same instinct in my grandfather, quietly stepping between people he loved and a debt that would have broken them. "Why do you think he never told anyone?" I asked. Patricia was quiet a moment. "I think Earl believed help you announce isn't really help. It's a transaction with witnesses. He didn't want witnesses. He wanted the person standing back up. That was the whole reward for him." I thanked her. I hung up. I sat at my kitchen table a long while, turning that sentence over, the way I turn over an old file I don't fully trust yet. Help you announce isn't really help. I thought about my mother's paint swatches. I thought about Travis calling me not built for owning things, in a house he'd never once actually held title to. I thought about every silent, overcorrected conversation my father ever had about that farmhouse. How much of it, I now understood, was a man quietly terrified of a debt only he and a dead man had ever known the true size of. I called Carol Ostrander again that week, this time with an actual decision forming, not just questions. "I want to understand my options," I told her. "Legally. If I decide to let my parents stay in the house, you're the trustee and the beneficiary both," she said. "You have full authority. You could sell it. You could evict them tomorrow, though I'd counsel against that without a transition plan. Or you could formalize a lease, fair rent or no rent. Keep the trust protections in place as long as you want. What would you recommend?" "I'd recommend you decide what kind of daughter you want to have been. 20 years from now, looking back at this decision. Not what kind of daughter they deserve you to be. Those aren't always the same question." I sat with that a long time after we hung up. That weekend, I drove out to the farmhouse for the first time since the bank meeting. I hadn't called ahead. My mother answered the door. She looked older somehow than 2 weeks earlier, though it had only been 2 weeks. "I wasn't expecting you," she said. "I wasn't expecting to come," I told her. "I wanted to see the place before I decide anything." She let me in without arguing. That itself told me something had shifted in the house's quiet architecture of power. I walked through it slowly. The kitchen, where Grandpa Earl used to shell peas at the table, talking business on the phone, unhurried, driving his old suppliers half to distraction. The hallway with school photos of me, Travis, and our cousin Danielle, uneven and slightly crooked, hanging that way for 20 years. The porch, last. The light was off. For the first time in longer than I could remember, nobody's turned it on since Dad died, my mother said, following my gaze. I keep meaning to. I don't know why I haven't. I'll do it, I said. I flipped the switch by the door before I left. I watched it catch and hold against the coming evening, the way it had held for as long as I'd been alive. My mother watched me do it without saying anything. When I turned around, her face had an expression I hadn't seen before. Not quite an apology, close enough to its neighborhood that I let myself notice it. Your grandfather always said this house remembers who carried it, she said quietly. I used to think that was just something old men say. I'm starting to think he meant it as an actual accounting. I think he did too, I said. I left that evening without making any promises, but I drove home with something settled in my chest that hadn't been settled in years. The particular calm of finally standing in a place you'd been circling from a safe distance, longer than you'd admitted to yourself. 2 weeks later, the bank's compliance review came back. Arthur called me himself. His tone was careful and businesslike, though I could hear something almost warm underneath it by then. The file's closed on our end, he said. No fraud referral. Your father cooperated fully once the trust surfaced. No evidence of intentional deception, just a genuine misunderstanding of who owned what. He paused. But I did want to let you know something else came up in the review. Something you'll probably want to see for yourself. What's that? I asked. There's a second document in your grandfather's original trust filing, attached but never activated, dated the same week as everything else. It names a contingent instruction in case the primary beneficiary, that's you, ever needed additional support to maintain the property. I think you should come look at it in person. I went back to Tri-County Savings that Friday. Arthur met me in the same conference room, the propane calendar still stuck on February. Like time in that room had simply given up. He slid a single page across the table, legal language dense at the top, but the middle paragraph was underlined in pencil. His own handwriting in the margin. It named a secondary trustee, someone to help manage the property or defend it legally if I ever needed it. Someone Grandpa Earl trusted enough to name outright, in writing, notarized the same week as everything else. Carl Renner. Any relation to Patricia, I asked. I already half guessed the answer. Her brother, he said, retired now. Used to practice law here in town. Real estate mostly. Your grandfather used him for the original land contract with your parents back in 1998. I sat back in my chair. Grandpa Earl hadn't just quietly paid two people's debts. He'd built a whole second layer under his own family. People he trusted in some ways, more than the family he was born into. It wasn't cruelty. I understood that now. It was insurance. The kind you buy after watching the people closest to you fail to protect what mattered. Again and again, until you stop hoping they'll change and start building around the gap instead. I called Carl Renner that afternoon. He remembered my grandfather instantly. Warmth entered his voice the second I said the name. Earl was the most patient man I ever drew papers for, he said. Never once raised his voice in my office. Not even the year your father missed 4 straight payments on that land contract. He could have taken the house back, I said. Absolutely he could have. Legally, cleanly. No argument against it. He chose not to. Said your mother grew up in that house. He wasn't going to be the reason she lost it a second time in one lifetime. A second time. I asked him what he meant. Carl paused. The pause of a man deciding how much history was actually his to share. Your mother's own father lost the original family farm in the 70s, he finally said. Bank foreclosure, plain and simple. Diane was a teenager. Earl married into that family not long after. Spent the rest of his life, best I could tell, making sure it never happened to her again, even after she stopped noticing he was doing it. I hadn't known any of that. Not one piece. My mother had never once mentioned a foreclosure, a lost farm, a teenage version of herself, watching her own family lose the ground under their feet. I thought about her smile at the funeral dinner. You'll never own anything worth keeping. I wondered whose voice she'd actually first heard say something close to that, decades before she ever said it to me. I drove to the farmhouse straight from that call. No warning again, just a question I needed to ask in person. My mother was in the garden, kneeling in the dirt, pulling weeds around tomato plants Grandpa Earl put in every spring since before I was born. Did your father lose a farm? I asked her. No hello first, when you were a teenager? She sat back on her heels slowly, dirt on her palms. She looked at me a long moment before answering. Who told you that? She said. Carl Renner, Grandpa's old lawyer. She was quiet a while. She pulled one more weed, set it aside with more care than a weed usually gets. I was 15, she finally said. We had 90 acres outside Zanesville. The bank took it in one afternoon, practically. My father never really recovered. Drank himself into an early grave a few years after. I spent the rest of my life terrified of standing in that exact spot again, watching something get taken while I stood there, unable to stop it. Is that why you and Dad never told us? I asked. About the reverse mortgage, about any of it. I didn't know about the reverse mortgage, she said, sharper now. I've told you that already, and I meant it. But I understand now why Earl never told me what he was doing either. He watched what losing that farm did to me. He wasn't going to let it happen to this family the same way, even if it meant keeping secrets from all of us to prevent it. I knelt down beside her in the dirt. The first time I'd done that since I was a child. You could have told me, I said. Any of it. I would have understood better than you think. I know that now, she said. I don't think I knew it then. I was so afraid of the ground disappearing. I never noticed you were the one person actually checking to make sure it hadn't. We didn't hug. Neither of us was built for a scene like that. Not yet. But we sat together in the dirt a long while, pulling weeds neither of us cared about. It was the first real quiet I'd shared with my mother in longer than I could remember. That evening, driving home, I finally understood the whole shape of it. My grandfather hadn't built a trust to punish anyone. He'd watched fear turn into silence in one generation, silence turn into a hidden debt in the next. He'd decided, quietly, patiently, that the only real protection was paperwork nobody could argue with later. Count carefully, he'd written, not because the money mattered most, because counting was the one thing that had ever kept this family standing upright. Generation after generation. When the people in it couldn't quite say the truth out loud to each other in time. I still hadn't decided what to do with the house, but for the first time since the bank meeting, I understood why he'd trusted me to be the one holding it when the moment finally came. 3 days after the bank meeting, before I'd opened the notebook at all, a woman named Sandra Kowalczyk called me. From a company called Heritage Home Equity Services, a loss mitigation specialist. She read my name off a list, carefully, the way people do when they've called the wrong number more than once that morning. I'm trying to reach whoever currently holds title on Sycamore Road in Coshocton, she said. Our records show a reverse mortgage originated in 2013. We've had difficulty confirming ownership since the borrower's father passed. I told her the truth. I was trustee and beneficiary of record as of a deed filed in 2015. I'd only learned it myself a few days earlier. Pause on her end. the pause of someone doing math they hadn't expected to need that day. That simplifies things considerably, she said. Frankly, this loan's been flagged for review over a year. The most recent appraisal put the home's value at $58,000 against a payoff balance of $71,300. We were preparing to discuss options with your father, including a possible deed in lieu of foreclosure. Deed in lieu of foreclosure. I wrote the phrase on a legal pad, not fully understanding yet how close it had come to my family's front door. How close were you? I asked. 90 days, roughly before the file moved to default servicing, she said. I'll be honest, since you're clearly managing this now. Once it moves there, options narrow fast. Your father would likely have received a formal notice within the year. I hung up. I sat very still at my kitchen table a long while, doing my own kind of math. 90 days. My father had been racing a clock only he could see, trying to add Travis's name to a house that would have been worthless to inherit within the year anyway. Worth less than the debt sitting on top of it. He'd never told anyone. Not my mother. Not Travis. Not even, apparently, the lawyer he eventually hired. I called him that evening. Not my mother. Him, specifically. I talked to Heritage today, I said. No preamble. The servicer on the reverse mortgage. Long silence. You knew it was underwater, I said. Didn't you? Before the bank meeting. Before any of this. I knew, he finally said. His voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. I've known for almost 2 years. Why didn't you tell anyone? Because telling your mother meant admitting I'd gambled her father's house on Travis's business. He paused. Telling Travis meant admitting there was nothing left for him to inherit anyway. And telling you? He stopped. Telling me what? I asked. Telling you meant admitting you were the only person who might know what to do about it, he said. I wasn't ready to admit that. Not after 20 years of telling you and everyone else you weren't the capable one. I didn't say anything for a while. I let that sentence sit, the way I let a hard number sit on a page before I decide what it actually means. I could have helped, I finally said, 2 years ago, if you'd told me. I know that now, he said. I think some part of me always knew it. I think that's exactly why I never asked. It wasn't an apology, not fully, but it was the closest thing to an honest sentence my father had ever said to me. I decided it counted for something, even if it didn't fix 10 years of silence in one phone call. The house isn't underwater anymore, I told him. Grandpa Earl paid the balance off in 2015. That's part of what the trust protected. You've been carrying fear about a debt that hasn't existed in almost a decade. Another long silence. He paid it off, my father repeated, like the sentence needed saying twice before it would sit right. And he never told me. I don't think he trusted you to stop being afraid of it, I said. I think he was right. You were still trying to gamble the house away 9 years later, without knowing there was nothing left to gamble. He didn't argue with that. I think he didn't have the energy left to. I brought this up in Carol Ostrander's office the following week. I wanted to understand it legally, not just emotionally. Your grandfather's payoff in 2015 erased the risk your father spent the next decade being terrified of, she said. Almost tragic, if you think about it. He carried a fear that had already been solved for years, because nobody told him it had been solved. Why wouldn't Grandpa just tell him? I asked. Once he'd paid it off. Carol considered that a moment. I can't know Earl's exact reasoning, she said. But I'd guess he didn't trust your father to change his habits if the fear went away too soon. Some people only stop taking a certain kind of risk when they still believe the last one nearly cost them everything. I thought about that a long time afterward. Cruelty or wisdom, keeping a man afraid of a debt that no longer existed? I decided eventually it was probably both. The way most of my grandfather's decisions seemed to be, once I understood the full shape of them. I told my mother the reverse mortgage detail a few weeks later. Her kitchen table, a Sunday afternoon. The paint swatches long since put away in a drawer somewhere. 2 years, she said quietly. He carried that alone for 2 years. I never once asked him why he'd gotten so strange about money. Would it have helped if you'd known? I asked. I don't know, she said. I'd like to think so. Honestly, I might have been too scared myself to hear it. I spent so long making sure nobody ever saw me as fragile, the way my own mother saw herself after we lost the farm. I built a whole personality out of never admitting I was frightened of anything. You're allowed to be frightened, I said. I think that's most of what Grandpa was actually trying to protect all of us from learning the hard way. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine, briefly, the first time she'd done that since I was small enough to need it done for me. I'm trying, she said. I want you to know that. Trying to say the frightening things out loud now, instead of just smiling through them at dinner. I noticed, I told her. It's a start. Sandra Kowalczyk called one more time a few weeks later to close the loop properly. I wanted you to know the file's fully resolved on our end, she said. The lien released, the account marked satisfied as of 2015, the whole record updated to reflect your grandfather's original payoff. It should never have taken this long to catch up on paper. I'm sorry it did. It's not your fault, I told her. The paperwork was always right. Nobody just asked it the right question until now. That's a generous way to put it, she said. Most people I call are angrier by this point in the conversation. I used to be the angry type, I said. I think I ran out of use for it somewhere around the second bank meeting. She laughed, a short, surprised sound. Like she hadn't expected a debtor's daughter to make a joke at her own family's expense. For what it's worth, she said, in 15 years doing this job, I don't think I've ever closed a file with a cleaner ending. Most of these just fade out. Foreclosure, or a short sale, or a family that stops answering the phone. Yours actually got fixed. My grandfather fixed it, I said, 9 years ago. I just finally read the paperwork. Sometimes that's the whole job, she said, reading it. Most people never do. I thanked her and hung up. I sat at my kitchen table a while, looking at the confirmation number she'd given me. A string of digits marking the exact moment my family's oldest quiet fear had finally, officially, ceased to exist on paper. I wrote the number in a fresh page of my own, tucked behind Grandpa Earl's last entry. A short heading of my own, closed for good this time. Then I closed the notebook and went out to the porch to make sure the light was still on. It was. I should tell you what happened next. It wasn't quiet. Quiet was what I'd expected from my family by then. 3 weeks after the garden, my father hired a lawyer, not Carl Renner, a younger man from Newark, Ohio, named Bradley Suggs. He specialized, his website said, in family wealth disputes. He sent Carol Ostrander a letter that Tuesday. It claimed the trust was improperly executed, that Grandpa Earl lacked full capacity by 2015, that the property should revert to my parents under Ohio's rules on undue influence. Carol called me the same afternoon it arrived. It's weak, she said. I want to be clear about that up front. Every document is dated, witnessed, notarized, by an attorney who's still alive and willing to testify. Your grandfather ran a business until he was 80. There's no medical record anywhere suggesting diminished capacity. But weak claims still have to be answered. Answering them costs time and money. How much time? I asked. If your father actually files, not just posture with a letter, we're looking at a probate hearing, 90 days out, easily. Maybe sooner, if we push for an expedited date. I sat with that news the way I sit with any bad title report, not panicking, cataloging what needed to happen next, in order. Push for the earliest date you can get, I told her. I don't want this hanging over the summer. My mother called that same week. Her voice was smaller than I'd heard in years. Your father didn't tell me he was doing this, she said. I found the letter in his truck. I want you to know I didn't agree to it. Do you agree with it now that you know? I asked. Long silence on her end. I don't know what I agree with anymore, she said. I know your grandfather loved you. I know he was careful, his whole life, about things I never once thought to be careful about myself. I think your father is scared, Megan. Not of you. Of what it means that his own father-in-law trusted his daughter with something he never trusted him with. That was, I think, the most honest sentence my mother had said to me in over a decade. The hearing landed on a Thursday in July. The Coshocton County Courthouse, 2 blocks from Tri-County Savings. A courtroom that smelled faintly of old radiator dust, even in summer. My father sat with Bradley Suggs at one table. Carol and I sat at the other. Travis showed up 10 minutes late. He slid into a bench beside my mother, who'd come alone, not seated with my father's side at all. I noticed that. I don't think anyone else did. Judge Halloran, an older woman, reading glasses much like Arthur's, worked through the filings methodically. Sharp, specific questions. Bradley Suggs struggled to answer without hedging. Had he personally reviewed the 2015 medical records showing no capacity issue? He had not. None existed. Had he interviewed the notary who witnessed the trust's execution? He had. She'd confirmed, under oath, that Earl Bowen had been, in her exact words, sharper than most men half his age, and asked me 3 separate clarifying questions before he'd sign a thing. Carl Renner testified next. He walked the court through the land contract history from 1998 forward. The missed payments, the reverse mortgage, the personal loan to Patricia Renner. All of it laid out in careful sequence, the way a good lawyer lays out a decade nobody else had bothered writing down properly. Then it was my turn. I brought the gray box. I set it on the witness table, exactly the way I'd set it on Arthur Kessler's desk months earlier. Dented corner up, initials catching the courtroom's fluorescent light, same as the bank's had. Miss Bowen, Judge Halloran said, can you describe, in your own words, your relationship with your grandfather? I thought a moment before answering, not because I didn't know, because I wanted to say it exactly right, the way you check a figure twice before committing it to a closing statement. He was the only person in my family who ever told me the truth, I said, about the house, about money, about who was carrying what and who wasn't. He didn't do it loudly. He did it in a ledger and a trust document, and one letter he asked me to keep sealed until I needed it. I think he trusted me because I was the only one who ever asked if he needed help, not because I'm smarter than my brother or better than my father, because I noticed him. I looked at my father, briefly, across the courtroom. I don't think he did this to punish anyone, I said. I think he was tired of being the only one holding a weight nobody else could see. And I think, if he could see this room, he'd want all of us to finally put it down together, instead of arguing over who carries it next. The room went quiet after that. The particular quiet courtrooms fall into when something true gets said out loud that nobody quite expected. Judge Halloran took a 15-minute recess. When she came back, she read her ruling from the bench in under 4 minutes. The trust stood. Fully valid, fully enforceable. No evidence of diminished capacity or undue influence anywhere in the record. My father's petition was denied. Costs of the proceeding, $3,200 in filing and transcript fees, she noted dryly, would be his to bear, given the thin basis on which the claim had been filed. My father didn't look at me when the ruling came down. He looked at his hands, folded on the table in front of him, the same way he used to look at them at holiday dinners, whenever the farmhouse came up and he went quiet. Bradley Suggs packed his briefcase without a word. He didn't shake my father's hand on the way out. That told me something about the conversation between them, later, that I didn't need to witness firsthand. Travis caught up with me in the hallway. "So that's it," he said. "It's just yours now, officially, in front of a judge and everything." "It was already mine," I said. "The judge just made it impossible to keep pretending otherwise. He didn't have a comeback for that." For the first time I could remember, my brother looked genuinely unsure what to say to me. Standing in a hallway that smelled like radiator dust, holding nothing in his hands at all. One more thing happened that same July day, at the courthouse, in the hour right after the ruling. My mother was waiting for me on the courthouse steps, alone. Travis had already left with my father, the two of them walking to the truck without speaking. The silence of two men who'd just lost an argument they hadn't wanted to admit they were losing until a judge said so out loud. "I need to say something," my mother told me, "and I need you to let me get through it without stopping me." I nodded. I sat down on the concrete step beside her, the July sun already hot enough to warm the stone through my slacks. "I told you that you'd die broke," she said, "at your father's birthday, in front of everyone. I've thought about why I said it more than almost anything else this past year. I don't have a good answer. I think I said it because you were the one thing in this family I never had to worry about. Somewhere along the way, I decided that meant you didn't need anything from me. Not attention, not credit, not even basic kindness. I think I mistook your competence for not needing me at all." I didn't say anything. I let her keep going. The way Grandpa Earl's letter had taught me to let hard things sit until they finished saying what they needed to say. "I was wrong," she said, "about all of it. You were the one taking care of things this whole time. Quietly. The way my father-in-law did. I spent 31 years too scared of my own history to notice I'd raised somebody exactly like him. I didn't know I was like him," I said. "Not until a few months ago." "I did," she said. "I think I knew it the first time you were 8. You caught me shorting the church collection plate by accident, just from watching me count it twice out loud without meaning to embarrass me. I think that's the exact moment I started being a little afraid of you. Not because you were unkind, because you were accurate. Accurate people make the rest of us feel exposed." I thought about that phrase a long time after she said it. Accurate people make the rest of us feel exposed. It explained more about my whole childhood than any single sentence anyone had offered me before. "I don't want to make you feel exposed," I told her. "I never did. I think I just never learned how to be anything other than accurate. It's the only thing that ever felt safe to be." My mother reached over and took my hand on that courthouse step, in front of the county building, in front of anyone walking past. "I'd like to learn how to be your mother again," she said. "Properly. Not the version who says careless things at dinner tables. I don't expect it to happen fast." "It doesn't have to happen fast," I said. "It just has to actually happen." We sat there a few more minutes, not talking, just two women on a hot concrete step outside a county courthouse, watching cars pull in and out of the lot across the street. I remember thinking, clearly, that this was the first time in my adult life my mother was actually looking at me, not past me, toward whichever child currently needed managing. I told Danielle about that conversation a few weeks later, over coffee, in person, the first time we'd sat across from each other in almost 3 years. "That's more than I ever expected out of Aunt Diane," Danielle said. "I mean that with love. She's not exactly known in this family for self-reflection." I don't think she'd disagree with you, I said. Do you believe her? Danielle asked. That she wants to actually change, not just say she does. I thought about it honestly before answering. Danielle deserved an honest answer, not a hopeful one. I believe she wants to, I said. I believe wanting to and actually doing it are two different muscles. Hers haven't been used much, but she's using them now, slowly. Sunday calls. An actual apology, out loud, no excuse folded inside it. That's more than she's done in 31 years combined. That's a low bar, Danielle said. It is, I agreed. But she cleared it anyway. I've decided that matters more than whether the bar should have been higher to begin with. Danielle nodded slowly. The way you nod at someone whose logic you can't quite argue with, even when part of you wants to. Grandpa Earl would be proud of you, she said. Not for the house, for handling it this way. Quietly. No gloating, no scorched earth. Just enough truth to fix what needed fixing. I think he built the whole system knowing exactly how I'd handle it, I said. That's the part that still gets me. He wasn't just protecting the house. He was betting on the specific way I'd choose to use it once I understood what it was. And you didn't disappoint him, Danielle said. I don't think I did, I said. I think that's the first time in my life I've been able to say that about anything in this family. Without qualifying it 3 different ways first. We sat with that a while. 2 cousins in a coffee shop that smelled like burnt espresso and cinnamon. Finally talking about something that had actually resolved instead of something still quietly festering underneath a family holiday. Driving home that evening, I remember thinking this was probably the closest thing to a happy ending Grandpa Earl had ever actually intended. Not a house, not money, just 2 people in his family, finally sitting across a table, telling the truth. Because someone patient enough had made it safe to do so. A week after the ruling, I drove back to the Coshocton County Recorder's office. The same building where I'd first pulled the chain of title on a rainy morning 9 months earlier. The clerk on duty was a woman named Louise Talbot. Gray-haired, reading glasses on a beaded chain. The kind of civil servant who's seen every version of a family fight cross her counter at least twice. I need to record a certified copy of a probate court order, I told her, sliding the paperwork across, confirming trust ownership on a Sycamore Road parcel. She scanned it, nodded once, and started typing without much reaction. The same way, I imagine, she processed 100 other documents that week. Each one somebody's entire story, reduced to a case number and a filing fee. This'll clear up the title chain nicely, she said, mostly to herself. I remember pulling this file for you back in the spring. Chain looked odd even then. It was odd, I said, for about 10 years. Most odd chains stay odd, she said. Folks don't usually come back to fix them properly. They just live with the mess. Or sell around it and hope nobody looks too close. I look too close for a living, I said. Occupational hazard. She smiled at that. The first real smile I'd gotten from anyone behind a government counter in longer than I could remember. She handed me back a stamped recorded copy. The county seal fresh, still slightly damp from the machine. I stood in the parking lot afterward, holding that single page. Something settled in me that I hadn't quite expected. Not triumph. Something quieter. The particular calm of watching a fact finally match its paperwork. Nothing left ambiguous for anyone to argue about later. I thought about the first time I'd stood in that same lot, 9 months earlier, holding nothing but a legal pad and a fact I didn't yet know what to do with. I hadn't known that morning how far the paperwork would eventually carry me. I only knew, standing there this time, that it had finally arrived exactly where it was always meant to. I drove straight to the farmhouse from there, recorded deed still in hand. I found my mother on the porch, shelling peas early for once, instead of waiting until evening. "It's done," I told her, holding up the page. "Recorded, clean. No ambiguity left anywhere in the chain. Nobody can ever again stand in a bank and pretend they don't know whose name is on this house." She set down her bowl and looked at the page a long moment, not really reading it, just looking at the seal, the way you look at something finally, undeniably real. "Your grandfather would have liked that word," she said. "Clean." "I think he built the whole thing so it eventually would be," I said. We sat together a while after that, the recorded deed between us on the porch rail, catching the last of the afternoon light. Neither of us needed to say anything else about it for the moment to feel complete. The week before the hearing, Carl Renner called me on a Tuesday evening, not about the case directly, just to check how I was holding up. He'd done that a few times by then. Small calls, nothing urgent. The kindness of an old man who understood how heavy this kind of proceeding gets before it's finished. "Your grandfather asked me something once," he said, back when we drew up the trust in 2015. "I've thought about it more this year than the whole decade since." "What did he ask?" I said. "He asked me what happens to a family that never learns to say a hard thing out loud." I told him, honestly, in my experience, it just keeps getting handed down. Quieter each generation, but heavier too. Like a debt nobody services on purpose, just lets compound. What did he say to that? He said, "Then I suppose somebody has to be the one who finally pays it off." I didn't fully understand what he meant at the time. I think I do now, watching you this year. I sat with that phrase a long while after we hung up. Somebody has to be the one who finally pays it off. I thought about my mother's father and the farm outside Zanesville, the particular kind of fear planted in one generation, waiting, patient as anything, for somebody accurate enough to finally dig it up and look at it directly. I think that's what the whole notebook was, in the end. Not a record of debts, a record of one man's decision to be the generation who finally stopped the compounding, quietly, patiently, one entry at a time, so the people after him wouldn't have to inherit the fear along with everything else. I called Carl back a few days later, after the ruling came down, just to tell him the case was closed. "I imagine he'd be relieved," Carl said. "Though I don't think relief was ever really what he was after." "What was he after then?" I asked. "I think he just wanted somebody in that family to finally sleep at night without wondering what they'd lose next," Carl said. "From what you've told me, Megan, I'd say that's exactly what you've built." I think about that sentence more than almost anything else anyone said to me that year. Somebody in that family, finally, sleeping through the night. Not because the money got sorted, though it did. Because the fear itself, the old inherited kind, finally ran out of new places to hide. I mentioned the notary who testified at the hearing. I should tell you more about her. She mattered more to this story than one line on a witness stand suggests. Her name was Ruth Paget. She'd run a small notary and tax prep office on Chestnut Street almost 30 years, 2 doors down from the recorder's office, where I'd first found the assignment that started all this. Carol Ostrander introduced us the week before the hearing. Coffee at a diner with paper placemats printed for local ads. "I remember your grandfather well," Ruth told me. Stirring sugar into coffee she didn't seem to want. "Most people who come in to notarize a trust are nervous, rushed, don't fully understand what they're signing." Earl read every page twice, asked what would happen if a beneficiary predeceased him, asked how hard it would be for anyone to challenge it later. "Did he say why?" I asked. He said, and I remember this exactly, because it's not a sentence you forget, "I want this to survive an argument I won't be alive to have." I sat with that phrase the rest of the afternoon. Ruth told me something else I hadn't known. Grandpa Earl came in twice more after the original signing. Once in 2017, once in 2019, each time, just to review the documents again. Make sure nothing needed updating. Confirm the beneficiary designation hadn't lapsed. Most people set something like this up once and never look at it again, she said. Your grandfather treated it like machinery that needed checking, like a furnace before winter. He built things to last, I said. I think that was just how he approached everything. He built you to last too, from what I can tell, Ruth said, not unkindly. Whatever he saw in you, he saw it early. He built around it patiently, the way you'd build around a load-bearing wall, instead of trying to move it. I thought about that phrase for days. Load-bearing wall. It fit better than anything else I'd found yet for whatever role I'd apparently been playing in my family, without fully understanding it. After the hearing, once the trust was confirmed, I asked Carol if there was anything else, any other piece of Grandpa Earl's paperwork I hadn't found. She checked the file thoroughly, cross-referenced everything against the county's original index. There wasn't. What I had was everything. The deed, the trust certificate, the notebook, the letter, the contingent trustee provision naming Carl Renner. A complete, closed system, built over years, waiting patiently for the one moment it would finally be needed. I asked Patricia later that year if she'd meet Ruth Paget properly. It turned out the two of them had crossed paths for years. Neither realized how connected their stories actually were, through my grandfather. They became genuine friends, coffee most months, at that same diner, trading stories about a man who'd spent decades quietly repairing half of Chestnut Street's finances without anyone comparing notes, until I forced the comparison myself. I started something small that winter, almost without meaning to. A second notebook of my own, modeled loosely on Grandpa Earl's. Not tracking debts I was covering for anyone, just the people in my life who'd shown up without being asked. Priya covering my caseload the week of the hearing. Carol staying late twice to prep testimony. Ruth driving 40 minutes on a workday just to testify for a family she barely knew. I don't know exactly what I'll do with that notebook yet. I think Grandpa Earl might have understood that uncertainty better than anyone else I could ask. He hadn't started his own ledger with a plan either, from what Ruth described. He'd just started writing things down, patiently. The moment he noticed something worth remembering, he let its purpose reveal itself over years, instead of demanding to know it all at once. That's the part of him I think I inherited most. More than the house, more than the trust, more than any single document sitting in a fireproof file at Carol's office now. Not the money, the patience to keep counting, quietly, long before anyone else understands why it matters. Travis asked me once that winter whether I thought Grandpa Earl had done the right thing, keeping so much hidden so long, letting an entire family live inside a story that wasn't quite true for the better part of a decade. I thought about it longer than he probably expected. I think he did the only thing he knew how to do, I told him. He watched fear turn into silence in his own wife's family. I think he decided the only way to actually stop that pattern was to build something silence couldn't touch: paper. Recorded, witnessed, notarized paper. The kind of proof that outlasts everybody's version of events, including his own. Do you think it worked? Travis asked. I'm sitting in his kitchen right now, talking to my brother about honesty instead of about who deserves what, I said. I think that counts as working. He laughed quietly. For once, neither of us needed to say anything else about it. I should tell you about the Dublin file, too. It didn't end the way most files like that end. I think it matters for understanding what I actually learned that year. The elderly client, Vivian Marsh, ended up not pressing charges against her son. She had every right to. The power of attorney had been used for something she'd never truly consented to, even if the paperwork technically allowed it. But Vivian decided, in the end, she wanted her son back more than restitution. She asked our firm to help structure something instead of pursuing him. I sat in on that meeting. Vivian had asked for me specifically. She remembered the call where I'd told her she didn't have to choose between loving someone and knowing what the paper said. I want a new power of attorney, she told the attorney handling her case. With my daughter as co-agent this time, any transaction over $1,000 needs both signatures. That's reasonable, the attorney said. Practical even. I'm not doing it to punish him, Vivian said. I'm doing it because I finally understand love and oversight aren't opposites. I spent my whole life thinking trust meant not checking. I don't think that anymore. I thought about Grandpa Earl the entire drive back to my office. Love and oversight aren't opposites. I don't think I'd heard anyone put it that plainly before. I don't think I'd fully understood it myself until a stranger in Dublin, Ohio said it out loud in a conference room that smelled like printer toner and stale coffee. I called my mother that evening and told her about Vivian, not the specifics, just the shape of it. I think that's what Grandpa Earl was doing this whole time, I told her. Not distrust, oversight. He loved all of us. He just didn't think loving us meant looking away. I wish I'd learned that sooner, my mother said. I think I confused looking away with being kind for most of my life. You're allowed to learn it now, I said. That still counts. Priya asked me, a few months after everything settled, whether the whole experience changed how I did my actual job. The day-to-day work of reading other people's deeds and mortgages for a living. I thought about it seriously before answering. It deserved a real answer, not a reflexive one. I used to see files as puzzles, I told her. Interesting, sometimes satisfying to solve. But ultimately, somebody else's problem, one I got to close out and move on from. I don't see them that way anymore. I think every file is somebody's version of my grandfather's notebook, a record of who actually carried what. Whether or not anyone else in their family ever noticed, that's a heavier way to look at your job, Priya said. Maybe, I said, but I think it's a truer one. She didn't have an answer for that right away. She nodded slowly, the nod of someone filing a thought away to return to later. She went back to her own desk. That was the end of the conversation, as far as either of us needed it to go that day. I still think about Grandpa Earl's ledger more than I probably should. For a document closed and copied and safely filed for over a year now, I think about the discipline of it. The years of small, patient entries. Nobody else reading them until circumstances finally forced the notebook open. I think about how easy it would have been for him to just tell everyone the truth. The moment he first paid off my father's debt, and how much harder and ultimately kinder it was to wait. To build something durable instead of something merely honest in the moment. There's a difference between those two things. I don't think I understood it before that year. Honest in the moment fades. It gets forgotten, argued over, reshaped by whoever tells the story loudest at the next holiday dinner. Durable outlasts all of that. Durable sits in a recorder's office on Chestnut Street. Dated, witnessed, notarized, waiting patiently for someone accurate enough to finally read it in order. I try to build things that durable now, in my own small ways, not just at work. At home, on Sycamore Road. In the notebook I keep on my own kitchen shelf, tracking not debts, but the people who showed up. Grandpa Earl taught me that without ever explaining it out loud, the same way he taught me to read a page twice before setting it down. The same way he handed me a locked gray box on a porch, 9 years before I understood what it actually held. He was right to wait. I understand that now, completely, the way you only understand certain lessons once you've finally lived all the way through them. Here's what I decided. In the weeks after the courtroom, sitting with the gray box finally empty on my kitchen table, its contents scattered into folders of my own making, my parents could stay in the farmhouse, not as owners, as tenants under a lease I wrote myself, using a template from work I never expected to need for my own family. $400 a month. Far below market, but not nothing. Grandpa Earl's notebook had taught me the difference between help you announce and help that lets a person keep some dignity. Rent, due the first of every month, the way he'd walked into that bank every first Monday for 26 years. My father balked at first. "You're going to charge us rent," he said, the day I brought the lease to the table, "on the house we raised you in. I'm going to let you keep living in the house Grandpa protected for 30 years," I said, "for less than a third of what it costs anywhere else in this county. I could sell it tomorrow, Dad. I'm not going to. But I'm not going to pretend none of this happened either." He signed it, not gracefully, but he signed it. Carol notarized it that same week. My mother started calling me on Sundays. Small calls at first, a question about a recipe, a comment about the weather. Nothing about the trust, nothing about money, just the careful rebuilding two people do when they've quietly decided to try honesty for once. I told her about Patricia Renner eventually. The loan, the 11 years at the feed store, the balloon payment Grandpa Earl had quietly stepped in front of. My mother cried when I told her that part. The only time I saw her cry through the whole thing. "He never told me any of it," she said. "Not one piece." "I don't think he told anyone," I said. "I think that was the design." I called Patricia myself a few weeks later, not for information this time, just to see how she was doing. We talked almost an hour about Grandpa Earl, the feed store, small things that had nothing to do with money. She still kept the loan receipts in a drawer, she told me. Every single one. 22 months of them. I started keeping better receipts myself after that. Travis surprised me that autumn. He called in October, a Tuesday evening, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "I've been thinking about what you said in the hallway," he told me, "about it already being yours. I think I always knew that somewhere. I just liked believing the version where I got the house without earning it." "What changed?" I asked. "Lost the dealership job," he said. "Actually lost it this time. I've been temping at a warehouse in Zanesville since August. First job I've had where nobody handed me anything. I don't love it. But I think I finally understand what you were doing, quietly, all those years." I didn't gloat. I told him the truth instead. "I never minded being underestimated," I said. "It meant nobody watched closely enough to interfere." He laughed, a real laugh. The first one I'd heard from him in years that wasn't aimed at someone else's expense. I helped him with his resume that winter. An hour on a Saturday. Cleaning up the formatting, cutting the exaggerations, adding the part he'd been too embarrassed to mention, that he'd kept that failing dealership's books balanced for 11 months before it caught up with all three partners at once. "You're better with numbers than you think," I told him. "Runs in the family," he said. "Just skipped me for a while." I fixed the farmhouse up slowly over the following year, on my own schedule, with my own money. A new roof, finally, $11,600, the one my mother had once promised away at a funeral dinner. A repainted porch, $900 more. The light on a timer now, catching every evening at dusk, whether or not anyone remembered the switch. I kept Grandpa Earl's leather notebook on a shelf in what used to be his study. Beside it, a framed copy of his letter, the original safe with Carol now, in a fireproof file of her own. I never fully figured out why he chose me over Travis, or our cousin Danielle. or anyone else in a family full of people who might have wanted that house. I think it wasn't really about deserving it more. I think it was simpler. I was the one who checked, the one who noticed a porch light burning, even as a kid, and wondered if anybody was paying the bill on time. He'd built his whole quiet system around people who checked. Patricia, checking her own debt every month until it was paid. Carl, checking every filing twice before he'd notarize it. Me, checking a chain of title on a house I didn't yet know was mine, purely out of habit, the week everything finally came due. Last spring, almost a year after the courthouse, I sat on that porch with my mother, shelling peas the way Grandpa Earl used to, the bowl between us, the light on early, though the sun hadn't dropped yet. Your grandfather used to say counting carefully was the only kind of love he trusted, she told me, not looking up from the peas in her lap. I think he meant it as a promise, I said. Not a warning. She nodded. For a while, neither of us said anything else. Just the small, steady sound of pods splitting open between our fingers, one after another. I still work in Columbus, still read other people's deeds 5 days a week, but I drive out to Sycamore Road most weekends now, because some habits, once you understand what they protect, are worth keeping on purpose. My father and I still don't talk easily. I don't think we ever fully will, but he pays his rent on the first of every month now, in person, at my kitchen table in Columbus. Last month he stayed 20 extra minutes just to ask how work was going. It isn't everything. I've stopped expecting everything from people who gave me so little of it for so long. But it's honest now, in a family that spent years mistaking silence for peace. I sit on that porch most Sundays, the light on, the fields quiet. I set the last empty pod on the railing beside me, the porch light held steady against the coming dark.